Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. In this video, I'm going to be talking about History GCSE, the International Relations topic, 1919 to 39. This particular video concentrates on what was going on between Russia and Poland, 1920 to 21. In October 1917, Bolsheviks had seized power in Russia. The Bolsheviks soon renamed themselves Communists. There was a Russian civil war between Reds, that's Communists, and Whites, anti-Communists. Try not to get distracted with that. Some parts of the Russian Empire went independent. Poland was partly made up of territory which formerly belonged to the Russian Empire. So there were Poles who were in the Russian Empire, uniting with Poles who were formerly part of the German Empire, uniting with Poles who were formerly part of the Austrian Empire. So Poland came back into being after 100 years of not being an independent country. But some Poles were still dissatisfied with their new borders, wanted more territory. They looked back to the 17th century when Poland had been the mightiest state in Eastern Europe. The British politician, Lord Curzon, he drew the border of Poland. He was tasked with doing this by the League of Nations, the Curzon line. But Curzon said that the British should not guarantee Poland's frontier, saying it was not worth the bones of a British grenadier. A grenadier being part of the type of soldier. He was paraphrasing Bismarck, who'd been Chancellor of Germany 20 years earlier. So some Poles wanted more land from Russia, from what we now call Belarus and the Ukraine as well. Russia was almost exhausted after the First World War, 2 revolutions in 1917, and a very internecine civil war. The communist government of Russia had no friendly governments to look to for succor. In 1920, Poland invaded Russia. There were ethnic Poles in these in the border states, in what are now Belarus and the Ukraine. The Ukraine briefly went independent herself. So Poland was trying to recreate her halcyon days of the 17th century. Perhaps it was foolish to be trying to live in the past. Poland had once ruled land from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The Russian Bolsheviks counterattacked and they pushed the Poles back to Warsaw, their capital. The Russian army closed in on Warsaw and it looked as though they would take Poland's capital. There's then a battle which was known as the Miracle of the Vistula, because the Vistula is the river that bisects Warsaw, and the Russians were defeated and driven back. They were then compelled to sign the Treaty of Riga. So the Russians gave back 80,000 square kilometers to Poland. In the vastness of Russia, that's not a lot of territory. But it's about 2/3 the size of England. So in absolute terms, it's substantial. Poland had broken the Paris peace treaties and got away with it. The League of Nations had done nothing to stop Poland, because, by the way, Russia, with her communist government, was not permitted to be a League of Nations member. And many people thought that Bolshevism was very dangerous, Bolshevism was communism, and the Bolshevik government in Russia ought to be overthrown. And some indeed were thankful that the Poles had given Russia a hiding. They hadn't completely defeated Russia, they hadn't gained as much as they wanted to. But it gets worse, in that one of the luminaries of the League of Nations, France, had actively assisted the Poles in what they'd been doing. They had helped Poland's depredations on Russia by arming Poland and by sending a military mission to provide advice to the Polish army. Indeed, Charles de Gaulle was a French army officer who was there counselling the Polish military on what to do. France had a very cordial relationship with Poland. France always sought to have an ally to the east of Germany, previously been the Russian Empire. Well, the Russian Empire was gone, that was its Bolshevik state, and most French middle-class and upper-class people wanted nothing to do with communism, which they thought was satanic. And by the way, of course, Russia didn't have a common border with Germany at the time, because Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia become independent, so had Poland. So therefore, Poland had to be France's ally to the east of Germany. So Poland was to be a cordon sanitaire for France to prevent communism being spread to Western Europe. Many communists said that their ideology was for export, they were going to liberate the working class, and that workers of all countries should unite and have a communist political and economic system. So when the Russian army had invaded Poland, the Russian leader Lenin said, "We're coming here to emancipate the Polish workers who were exploited by the middle class and upper class in Poland." The trouble was for Lenin is that very few working class Poles saw it that way, and for them nationalism trumped class identity. And many Poles said it doesn't matter whether the Russians believe in communism or Tsarism, it's really just Russian nationalism under a new guise. Anyway, the French were trying to create a potent anti-German force in Eastern Europe. That was Poland. Come on to other challenges to the League of Nations. Italy and Corfu. In 1923, an Italian general named Tellini was driving around Albania and Greece, trying to figure out where the frontier between these two countries ought to be. He had been tasked with doing so by the League of Nations, come up with a new, fairer border between Albania and Greece. Tellini's convoy of cars was ambushed. He and 4 other Italians were shot dead. So the new Prime Minister of Italy was Benito Mussolini. He'd taken office in October 1922, and he led the Fascist Party. Mussolini spotted a golden opportunity. He said that Greeks had murdered Tellini, and he demanded that the Greeks execute the killers and pay compensation to Italy. No one has ever proven who actually killed Tellini. It might have been a Greek, it might have been Albanian, it might have been someone of a different nationality. We don't know. But Mussolini simply jumped to a conclusion. So the Greek government said, well, they hadn't caught the killers. You can't guarantee you'll catch someone who commits murder. And the Greek government itself had nothing to do with the crime. I don't know anyone who disputes that bit now. And the Greek government said, well, we're not going to pay compensation. If someone who is British commits a murder of someone of another nationality, the UK government does not have to pay compensation to that other country. The murder is committed by the individual. It's not the whole country is culpable. Anyway, it's never been established that it was Greek who did it, let alone the names of the individuals. So Mussolini sailed his navy off the coast of the Greek island of Corfu and bombarded it. The Italian navy was formidable. The Greek navy was puny. Italian troops then occupied the island. Greece appealed to the League of Nations. So the League of Nations voted to censure the Italian action. Mussolini perceived that the League of Nations was all talk and no action. So he rode out the storm. He uses leverage in the League of Nations to make the League of Nations change its opinion. The League of Nations Assembly had 1 vote for every country, but this was simply an advisory vote. It didn't compel any action. There was the Council of the League of Nations, in which a few of the most powerful countries sat: Italy, France, the UK, and Japan. So the League of Nations then changed its position. The Council of the League of Nations voted that Greece must pay Italy 50 million Italian lira. That was Italian currency at the time. So Mussolini had been able to browbeat the French and British by reminding them how they'd let Italy down after the First World War by not granting Italy a lot of the land that they'd promised they would give Italy from from what was then Yugoslavia, really Slovenia and Croatia, we call it today. So they French and British valued the friendship with this fairly powerful country, Italy, more so than they did the relationship with a small, feeble, and fairly unstable country, Greece. So a determined aggressor had got away with it. Crime had been made to pay, and other would-be aggressors took note. Mussolini then took the town of Fiume from Yugoslavia. It's in what we would now call Croatia. Yugoslavia felt too weak to fight back and had no allies to support them. This was going to be a town on the coast, and the Italian navy was a serious force. The Yugoslav navy was not. Yugoslavia is now several countries: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, Macedonia, and Kosovo. So that was that. Italy had gotten away with it again. There was some sort of historic claim there. An Italian ultranationalist had seized Fiume a few years before. D'Annunzio was his name, and the Italian government had forced him to give it back to Yugoslavia. So this is another example where an aggressor who was obdurate could brass it out. So this was a precedent that prefigured a grisly repetition in the years to come.